The other thing that her family was very fond of doing besides reading was exchanging wordplay, writing little tidbits, writing jokes and riddles for one another. And that was, I think, a way that she was honing her comedic skills for her later productions of novels. And of course, she was writing a lot during her young years as well, but I'll talk about that a little bit more afterward. And one other thing that I wanted to mention was that they were also putting on scenes, and that's what we're going to be doing very shortly. This was something that her brothers were very keen on. They would set up the scenes and get all the characters and the costumes, and they would do little plays for the family. We don't know for sure whether the girls played much of a role in these. It's possible that they had very small parts. Jane was very young when they produced the first one, so most likely she was only a spectator. But this was also a part of her growing up years. One other relative that I wanted to mention who had an influence on her was her exciting cousin from France, who had actually been born in India and lived in France, Eliza de Fouillide. And she brought into the very English country atmosphere of Jane Austen's childhood life kind of a whiff of something from outside, because Eliza had married a French count and gained herself a title and an air of aristocracy thereby. And sadly, her husband was actually guillotined during the French Revolution. Eliza was quite lucky to escape. So sometimes people will say, oh, well, you know, why doesn't Jane Austen mention big historical events that were going on at her time? We certainly know that she was not unaware of them. They were definitely part of her world and something that she would have known about. So, as I mentioned, during the years between the ages of 12 and 18, Jane Austen was starting her writing career, and she was writing the little brief works of fiction that are now referred to as the juvenilia. She gathered them herself into 3 volumes of writing. They're little tiny tidbits of writing that are, I think, extremely funny. In fact, one night I was up late, I can't remember why, and reading them again. I had read them for a while, and I was actually laughing out loud and had to put the book down because I was worried that I would wake people up. That's how funny I find them, but if you go for Jane Austen's sense of humor, then you'll love the juvenilia. But before we get there, we're going kind of in reverse order chronologically in terms of her literature. I'm just going to talk a little bit about children in the novels and the way in which she uses children and how they function as a part of the novels. So, starting with Sense and Sensibility, which is one of what are called the 3 early novels. Sometimes they're divided into the early novels and the late novels, but that's not based on publication date, it's based on when she was writing the first draft of them. So, in Sense and Sensibility, there's a character called Lady Middleton, whom you may or may not remember, because she's not really all that significant, and Jane Austen goes to some length to show us how insignificant she is, in that she's really not very interested in much other than her children. And having said that, she's not particularly interested in parenting her children. She just kind of likes having them there to show off, and she sits around very languidly letting other people deal with her ill-behaved offspring. So, in this particular scene, the 2 Dashwood girls are in the room with Lady Middleton, and so are the 2 Miss Steeles. You may remember that Lucy Steele is the little minx who nearly steals away Edward Ferrars from Elinor Dashwood. Although I suppose we can't accuse her of stealing him, since technically she had him first. And Jane Austen really sets up a contrast between the way the Steeles behave and the way the Dashwoods behave with regard to Lady Middleton's children. The Steeles are very, very flattering of the badly behaved children, and Elinor soon allowed them credit for some kind of sense when she saw with what constant and judicious attentions they were making themselves agreeable to Lady Middleton. With her children they were in continual raptures. Fortunately, a fond mother, though in pursuit of praise for her children, the most rapacious of human beings, is likewise the most credulous. She will swallow anything. She saw with maternal complacency all the mischief cousins submitted. She saw their sashes untied, their hair pulled about their ears, their work bags searched, and their knives and scissors stolen away, and felt no doubt of its being a reciprocal enjoyment. And this is Lady Middleton. "John is in such spirits today," said she, on his taking Miss Steele's pocket handkerchief and throwing it out of the window. On the second boy's violently pinching one of the same lady's fingers, she fondly observed, "How playful William is! And here's my sweet little Anna Maria. Never was there such a quiet little thing." But unfortunately, a pin in her ladyship's headdress, slightly scratching the child's neck, produced from this pattern of gentleness such violent screams as could hardly be outdone by any creature professedly noisy. Now, Miss Steele's reaction to this is to say to Eleanor later when Lady Middleton's out of hearing, "I love to see children full of life and spirits. I cannot bear them if they are tame and quiet." To which Eleanor replies with a sentiment we can probably all relate to. "I confess," replied Eleanor, "that while I am at Barton Park, I never think of tame and quiet children with any abhorrence." So that's to show us, I think, that Eleanor and her sister, although different, are both really incapable of being insincere. They're genuine, they're earnest, they're not able to flatter and be false with anyone. And that's the way that the children kind of function in that scene. Sometimes we also hear a little bit about the way that the child's nature is kind of indicative of how they're going to be later on. So in Pride and Prejudice, you may remember the housekeeper saying of Mr. Darcy, "I have always observed that they who are good-natured when children are good-natured when they grow up. And he was always the sweetest-tempered, most generous-hearted boy in the world." And that same note, the sweet-temperedness, comes in when we hear about Jane looking after her Aunt Gardiner's 4 children. They were to be left under the particular care of their cousin Jane, who was the general favourite, and whose steady sense and sweetness of temper exactly adapted her for attending to them in every way, teaching them, playing with them, and loving them. It can be tricky sometimes to tell where Austen is being ironic and where she's not, but I think that we can be pretty sure that when a person is good with children and knows how to deal with children, which means not just humoring their every wish, but actually knowing how to keep them in line and to be kind and gentle with them at the same time, that's a character that we're intended to have some esteem and admiration for. I'm jumping to one of the late novels now, to Persuasion. In Persuasion, there's a scene where one of the sons of Anne's sister Mary hurts himself. He has a bad fall, and there's some uncertainty about his state of health afterward. The mother, Mary, is not one of the more admirable characters in Austen, and she completely goes to pieces, as she tends to do over almost anything. On the contrary, her sister Anne had everything to do at once: the apothecary to send for, the father to have pursued and informed, the mother to support and keep from hysterics, the servants to control, the youngest child to banish, and the poor suffering one to attend and soothe. Mary doesn't really have any problem with Anne taking over her role. In fact, she's quite irked when she hears that her husband Charles is still thinking of going out to the dinner that they were supposed to go to meet Captain Wentworth, and she's expected to stay home. "So, you and I are to be left to shift by ourselves with this poor sick child. I knew how it would be. This is always my luck. If there's anything disagreeable going on, men are always sure to get out of it. So here he is to go away and enjoy himself, and because I am the poor mother, I am not to be allowed to stir." This could potentially be seen as the early voice of feminism, except that I don't think that we're supposed to think particularly highly of Mary in this scene. Anne responds, "A sick child is always the mother's property. Her own feelings generally make it so." So it's a given that it's natural for the mother to want to care for her child in a situation like this. Mary is therefore behaving in an incorrect and unnatural manner in trying to get out of that responsibility, and it's kind of surprising to Anne that she would even question whether or not she should stay with the child under these circumstances. It does end up being Anne who looks after him, and Mary says, "You who have not a mother's manage to quiet their consciences, and they go off to their party. And Anne was left with as many sensations of comfort as were perhaps ever likely to be hers. She knew herself to be of the first utility to the child, and what was it to her if Frederick Wentworth were only half a mile distant, making himself agreeable to others? So because someone has to step in and assume the correct role with regard to the children, Anne is forced to put herself in a position where she's guaranteeing that she's going to remain a spinster. And that seems like a lot to load onto that scene, but she doesn't know at that point whether she'll ever have another opportunity of seeing Frederick Wentworth, and she's certainly not going to marry anyone else. So that's how much she privileges duty, the fulfillment of duty, and particularly maternal duty in this scene.